We are living in a chaotic time, aren't we? Things in our culture right now, they just seem so fragmented, so broken sometimes. And, as we follow Jesus Christ and we try to kind of navigate the world around us and walk and live and do the things that Jesus calls us to do, we need extra wisdom. I think we need a lot more wisdom in our lives. And, I have you noticed lately that just when it seems like the world can't get any crazier, it does? But we need wisdom. We need wisdom to navigate a crazy world and all areas of we need wisdom in our church. We need wisdom in our relationships. We need it in our marriages. We need it as we parent kids, in our dating lives, in our work lives. We need wisdom literally in every area of our lives. Dare I say, as we navigate a tumultuous election year, we need wisdom. Everybody needs wisdom. And the good news is there's tons of wisdom available to us. But you got to know where to look. And you have to be willing to look. And the scriptures teach us that if we need wisdom, we can ask God. He gives it freely. And I hope you've enjoyed this series as we've walked through parts of the book of Proverbs, as some of our pastors have kind of shared wisdom from the pages. And, there's so much good stuff in there. We could spend way more time in there. And in fact, I was planning to start something new today, and then I just felt really strongly like God wanted me to finish off the series with one more message from Proverbs. And I tried to get out of it. I made up excuses, and I'm gonna talk about it because it's a subject that actually affects every single one of us. It's also a subject that's found all throughout the pages of God's Word. And yet, for some reason, there's people that think we shouldn't talk about it in church. But that's kind of part of the problem. Part of the problem is we don't talk about this subject in church. And I think that's not good. The reason is because everybody out there's talking about it every day. Everybody's talking about it. The world is talking about it all over the place, and yet we don't talk about it in the church. And that's part of the problem. And one area where the book of Proverbs and the whole Bible actually has so much to say is the area of sex. And, disclaimer, I had somebody a few years back when we said that word here at church, and she left and never came back because it shouldn't be said in church. And it's like, it's in here. Like, why? We can't say what's in here? Like, this, isn't this part of the big reason we gather on Sunday is to talk about what this says? And it says so much about this topic, and yet you can't say that. I don't understand that mindset. But the more that I thought about this the last couple of weeks, the more I thought, I can't skip this. We're a church that says we don't avoid topics from God's Word, and so it's something we're going to talk about. Today we're going to talk about sex. And I know some of you are already getting all fidgety in your seat just from me saying that, and what in the world have I walked into? And, this is my first time here at Rise. Oh, shoot. And then others of you, you've been coming for years, and you're like, why did I come today? But here's the thing. There is no subject that's off limits when it comes to God's wisdom. There isn't. There's no subject that we shouldn't be able to talk about if we are a healthy community of believers or want to be. There's no subject we shouldn't be able to talk about what God says about it in community if we're healthy, or if we want to be healthy. And so I'm trying to approach this from a place of health and maturity, and there's a lot that it says here. One of the more common topics in Scripture, really, but we need to talk about this. And the reason we need to talk about this in the church is because, like I said, everybody else is. And if the entire world is talking about sex and we avoid talking about it ever in the church, then guess what? That's part of the problem. The world out there is constantly shouting a narrative to everybody about sex and what it is. And it's loud. And the world out there has even convinced a large percentage of people that sex is like a god, that it should be worshiped and bowed down to, and it's what defines you, and it's where you get your identity from, and it's what should fuel the moves that you make in life and dictate how you believe and how you love and how you act, and that is never what God said it was, just so you know. And if we as the people of God don't lean in extra hard, especially these days, to see what he actually says about this subject, then we'll be like the people that we just kind of sang about in that song. Firm foundation, you know where that song comes from? It comes from the place where Jesus was talking about how if you build your house on the foundation of sand, then the walls are going to crumble. But if you're willing to build your house on the solid foundation of God's wisdom and truth, then it will stay standing even when the waves come, even when the wind blows. And so many of us aren't willing to look at what it looks like to build our house in different areas of our life on a firm foundation that's not going to crumble, and then we wonder why things are crumbling. And by the way, anything in the world right now that appears to be crumbling, it's because it's departed from God's wisdom. It's departed from the Word of God. And we have got to lean into this and be bold enough and mature enough to talk about this because, hey, would it surprise you to know that there's people in our church that are single and dating? I feel like so many churches leave them out. And you guys matter just as much as anybody else. There's so much that you can glean from God's wisdom for this season of your life as well. And there's people that I talk to all the time in our church who are single or dating, and they're trying to figure out how to do this in the first place, and they're wondering, where does God's wisdom play into this season of my life? And you want God's wisdom, but you have this desire inside of you and this drive inside of you, but nobody's willing to talk to you about it because you can't talk about it in the church. How do I live this part of my life out in a God-honoring way? Like, what do I do with the appetite that I have? And how do I experience all of the good things God has for me, but also trust Him when it's hard? And what's the context for this? And what's the context for that? And there's so many questions right now in the church. And you know, we need to talk about this for that reason. We also need to talk about this because there's parents in the church. There's mothers and fathers who are asking constantly, how in the world do I talk to my kids about this subject? It's hard. And I'm not even talking about like teenagers, by the way. I'm talking about younger than that because they're already getting fed a narrative even younger than that about it, whether you think they are or not. And we try to protect our kids and we try to be the main voice in their lives, but the truth is it's harder and harder to be these days. They're being fed a narrative as they're watching TV that you might not even know about. They're being fed a narrative when they watch a movie alone and you're not watching what they're watching and you don't even know what's in it. People are receiving narratives from TikTok and YouTube and all these different places, their friends. We're all learning stuff, whether we want to admit it or not. And so if we as Christian parents aren't willing to be educated by the Spirit of God through the Word of God, even on uncomfortable topics, then we're going to end up in this place where eventually we're trying to undo something that our kid has come to believe that's not actually true, but for somehow they've come to believe it because maybe we never actually even had a conversation with them. And I know there's some hard things being said today, but it's coming from a place of compassion. If you remember, the book of Proverbs is supposed to be read through the lens as if a loving, gentle father or mother is sharing wisdom with their child. That's the way to read the book of Proverbs. And so as you hear some wisdom today, I hope that you can hear it as if a loving father is sharing some wisdom with you that can help you in your life. But we need to talk about this in the church. People are single, dating, parents are trying to navigate this. We need to talk about it because there's married people in every church who ever since they got married, they kind of thought, well, we don't have to talk about this topic anymore and we just get a free pass because now we're married, we're doing it God's way, as they say, and hey, it's supposed to be easy now that we're married and it's just always good, right? All the married people are laughing because you have all these views about how this stuff's going to be in marriage that you don't even know because you're not married. And the truth is, it's still hard when you're married, and there's still things to navigate that are challenging. It's not just like, hey, I'm married, I got my reward, yay. That's not how this works. And one of the, as a pastor who's sat with so many people over the years who are struggling with such a wide variety of different things, I can tell you hands down that there's a lot of things, but one of the things that I hear a lot that is a primary point of disconnection and eventually dysfunction in a marriage is two people who are not on the same page about what sex is. Now, I'm not talking about all the ins and outs and the stuff that you might get through marriage counseling and all that. That's all good too. I'm talking about just the basic definition of what it even is and what it's for. You got to be on the same page about that first, and that's one of those foundational pieces that I think the church does a really lousy job of teaching these days. And so that's a piece of what we're talking about today. I pray that this stirs up conversation That's been my prayer the last few days, is that this is something we can't possibly cover in one Sunday morning in its entirety, and this is not going to be a deep theological dive on all things sex-related from the Bible. This is going to be a flyover of, hey, we have to have a foundation. We have to understand a couple of key principles about this, and there's some wisdom here that we need to apply to our lives. And so my prayer is that the conversation wouldn't just stop with me about this topic in the 1 hour we get together on Sunday morning, but it would be in small groups or in your marriages or in the car on the way home. I think that these are important conversations to have. So in light of that, what does the Proverbs say about sex? What does God's wisdom say about sex? And let me just share some truths that come from here that I think will help everybody and help us understand the design. And maybe we in our culture have strayed away from what God says in this area, and so it's important to kind of look at that. And before I dig into this, I just want to say, because I know some people are uncomfortable, okay? How do you think I am, like having to do this for 600 people today? So I think in the context of a healthy community, church family, when people are willing to have open hearts and hear what God actually says from his word, I think that this can be a very life-changing thing that does not have to be awkward. It does not have to be difficult. I'll stop on that. Enough disclaimers. Let's just dig into it. Okay, so remember, here's the first thing I want to share with you. This is an important principle that I think many of us have forgotten. Sex actually has a designer. Or you could say it has a design. I put them both in there because both of those matter. Because it has a design, that means it had a designer. Because it has a designer, that means it has a design. Okay? That's important to understand, that it has a designer. If there's one foundational thing I want everybody to make sure they grab and walk out of here with today, it's this point. That sex actually has a designer, and the designer is good. And what he designs is good. Okay? I want to throw that out there. So I'll dig into that more in a minute, but let's read from Proverbs 7, because this is a general principle that definitely applies here. Verse 1, my son, or my sons and daughters, keep my words and store up my commands within you. So he's saying, I have an intention with the words I say. I have a purpose in it. I'm deliberate with my commands. I have some thoughts on this matter. I have truth on this subject. There's a plan behind all things, and I have revealed it to you, so listen to my words and store it up within you. He says, keep my commands, and you will live. So understand my design for things. Submit your will to my design. That's a hard thing to do sometimes, right? Because we all have our own will. Some of our will is stronger than others' will. We have our own will, we have our own desires, we have our own wants, our feelings, our leanings, our needs, whatever you want to call them. But what the scriptures actually teach is that when you come to Christ, you're called to crucify your selfish desires. You're called to deny your own desires, your own feelings, your own way of life, and now you're going to follow his. That's the calling of Jesus Christ. And if you actually follow his calling, you will experience fulfillment and freedom beyond what you ever imagined possible, that you couldn't find in all the other things that you sought it in as hard as you tried. This is the one place that you can actually find it. He says, keep these commands and you will live. Guard my teachings as the apple of your eye. That's how we're actually to see his wisdom, his words, his teachings, that they're the apple of our eyes. They mean that much. They're that important to us, that he can shine light on any area of our life, no matter how hard it is to dissect that, and it's life-changing. So, sex has a design. It has a designer. Now, I want us to be really honest for a minute, and I want you to answer this question, not out loud, but inside yourself with absolute integrity. Because you need to know, whether you've realized it or not, where you stand on the answer to this question. It's important, okay? There really are only 3 conclusions you can draw in terms of where you believe sex actually came from. I'm going to walk you through them real quick, okay? There's 3 conclusions you can come to. There's only 3, really. And the fact that sex has a design, here's the question. Where do you think sex came from? That's the question. Just think about that. You individually, where do you believe sex actually came from? So let me walk you through the 3 conclusions you can draw. The first one, and a lot of people believe this, is that, well, there's no God, there's no creator, nobody actually intentionally, deliberately designed all of this that we see as we walk the world. We weren't created by a being. We were just the result of a cosmic bang. And so sex came from this, it came basically from evolution ever since then. And as we have evolved, we've evolved in that way, and we're still evolving today. And so sex is really just an extension of this evolutionary process. And the reason that it's here scientifically is for procreation and for pleasure. And so basically that means you can just do with it whatever you want because nobody actually created it or designed it for a purpose. You can define it for yourself. A lot of people today feel that way. And hey, if that's where you land, you believe that's where sex came from, I love you. You're so welcome here. I would love to sit down with you anytime, and I'll be your friend, like whatever. But I also love you enough to challenge you. And can I lovingly challenge that thought for just a minute by asking you, what if there is a God? What if there's a God who's more real than you ever imagined possible, that every time that you ever see beauty in this world, there's a mind that was behind it? That every time you see something in creation out there, that it was created by a creator. That every time you see art, there is an artist behind it. It didn't just randomly show up as an accident. And by the way, especially if you're somebody that has studied and understands science, by the way, this world is way too intentional. It's way too beautiful, particular, cohesive, every little nuanced piece working together so perfectly to say that there wasn't a mover in the beginning. It's too deliberate. By the way, there's something deliberate about you if you've never thought about that before. And that deliberateness is the mark of a designer, a creator, an artist. And he also, after he created you and designed you, reached out, or maybe is still reaching out to you through his son Jesus, who came to earth, lived a perfect life, died an unjust death, rose from the dead to give you a gift that you maybe haven't yet received. And he is a designer, a master designer. So that's one place you can come from in your beliefs when it comes to where sex comes from, okay? There's a second one, and I hear this one a lot, actually. It's pretty dominant today. It's the conclusion that, well, yes, there's a God, there's a creator. I'm not an atheist, I'm not an agnostic. I believe there's a God. I believe he created all of this world. I believe he created men and women and the heavens and the earth, and he made them all. But then from that point on, it's really more of like a choose your own adventure. From that point on, it's really more, I believe God made all of this, but then it's like you kind of work out your own truth, what's right for you in terms of your sexuality. And what feels right should be right, and I don't feel like it's hurting anybody, so why do you care? And people really kind of form their own narrative that fits with how they already see the world. That's what's happening. But the problem with that, and I'm saying this with as much compassion as I can, because it really matters. If you have bent truth your entire life to fit your narrative, then you have most likely veered from the truth completely. Let me say that again. If you've spent much of your life bending truth to fit you, instead of figuring out what the truth is and adapting to it, you most likely aren't close to the truth at all. And Jesus himself famously said, if anyone would follow me or come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And at the core of what he's saying there, it's if you want to follow me, if you want to be my follower, my disciple, you're dying to your old self, whatever that looked like. You're willing to deny the old you, your old beliefs, your old way of life, your old actions, your how you saw yourself in you're letting that be crucified so that you can now follow me, he says. Completely willing to deny anything from the past, anything within you that doesn't fit into how he's asking you to come with him. And whether you've come to realize it or not, he's actually doing that because he loves you, and whether you know it or not yet, there's a better way. Because it's the way he designed it to be. It's the way he created it to be. And I'm not up here today to throw shade. I'm not up here to say things that make people feel bad. And in fact, I'm the king of doing what I just described. I've done this so many times in my life where I take my own feelings, my own leanings, my own selfish desires, and I try to fit God around what I feel my life should be like. I try to fit God into what I feel will make me happy. Instead of asking God what's true and what's best for me, whether I think it is or not, and asking Him to give that to me. And saying, I'm going to fit my life around your truth and your design, God, instead of forcing you into my little box that I think is the truth. And if that's you today, and that's where you sit with your logic, can I just lovingly warn you? By fitting God around your preferred narrative in life, you're actually walking away from what you're really looking for inside in your heart and soul, which is true freedom, and you're not going to find it outside of Jesus Christ. There's a third conclusion that you can come to regarding where sex comes from. And a lot of people stand here. You say, I believe in God. I believe He created everything, including me. I believe that I'm made in the image of God, as it says, Genesis 1:26. He designed everything, and so sex has a design. There are people in this room who believe that. Sex has a designer. God is the designer, and the designer is good. I don't know if you've ever watched a master craftsman build something, or a carpenter or a master artist create this masterpiece, and all of the nuances and small details and little pieces and tools they use, and everything from their mind and creativity that go into creating this. And then when it's done, you look at it and you just can't even believe that somebody actually made that. Because it's beautiful and it's big and it's profound, and I don't even understand how that took a lot of intention and deliberateness to make what they started with into that. A big purpose put into that. A lot of heart put into that, meaning there's a lot of meaning in that maybe you don't understand if you're not the actual one with the heart of the artist. And it's so important to understand that God is deliberate in His design. He's intentional in His design of all things. God does not make mistakes. He doesn't slip. God doesn't say, oops. He is perfect in His design. And some of you actually need to hear this part too. You are not an accident. You were created by a master designer who loves you more than anybody else on the face of the earth ever could. And He created you deliberately and intentionally and with purpose and with more heart than anybody that you've ever met. And so if you believe that, if that's where you stand, yes, I believe God created everything. He designed it. He's deliberate in His design, then I'm going to challenge you. If you claim to believe that God is the designer of all things, if you really believe that, then you also have to allow Him to be the definer of all things. Because the designer gets to define it. If I design something, I'm going to define it. I'm going to tell you how it works, why I made it, what it's for, how it works best. Its intention. Because I'm the one that designed it. I know best. If He designed something a certain way, you have to allow Him in your life, including and especially in the sexual part of you. You need to allow Him to be not just the designer, because He already did that, but the definer. So let me just give you a definition once and for all for sex. What is sex? And we'll dig into this a little deeper, but here's the thing. If you study the whole book, not just one line cherry picking here and there, if you study the whole book and everything that this says about this topic, from Old Testament through New Testament, from Genesis to Revelation, what you're going to see is a continuity, a consistent definition of what it was designed to be. And so in Genesis 1, 2, 3, and 4, what you'll see is that sex, first of all, was a gift and a blessing. Some people need to hear that. It was a gift and a blessing given to one man and one woman within the context of what's called covenant marriage to be mutually enjoyed, you can amen that part, and to bring about a deeper sense of connection. So there's a purpose to it. Let me walk you through that really quick. Let me say it again. So sex is a gift and a blessing when looked at it through God's eyes. So it's nothing to be shameful about. It's nothing that's dirty or weird or wrong. It's nothing that you can't talk about in the church. It's a gift and a blessing given by God to one man and one woman within the context of covenant marriage to be mutually enjoyed and to bring you and knit you closer together. The Hebrew word, by the way, for sex, if you look at the original language that you'll find it in, the original word is the word yada. And yada means so much more than a physical connection. If you look at the literal definition, it's actually one of the deepest spiritual and emotional connections that two people can have. To fully know someone and to be fully known is another way that that word is defined. And so God designed it so that when you enter the covenant bond of marriage, it is so much more powerful than just consummating a marriage. It is so much more meaningful and deep than what so many people see it as. And that's its purpose. And so if something has a design, this is what leads us to the next piece of wisdom, then what happens when we use something that's designed for something specific in a way that it wasn't designed for? Most of the time, in different ways, departure from the design leads to destruction. And I don't mean destruction as a be-all, end-all, you're done. I tried to find the best word I could choose for this, but that really is the best word, that when we use something, when we depart from the design of something, it does lead to some form of destruction. And when I say this, I'm not trying to hurt people in the room. And my intention is not to say, well, you know, since you departed from God's design, it's over for you, because that's not true either. And I'm not trying to make people feel bad. I'm just trying to make a logical, biblical statement that a departure from any design will result in some form of destruction. And you say, well, whatever, man, I've been doing this for years. I'm pretty good with how things are. No. Depart from the design will lead to some form of destruction. And if you know me at all, you know that I would really struggle to function throughout the week without this. It's one of my most valuable tools. It's my biggest tool of communication. I can't keep up with everything without it. It's very valuable to me. And this was designed by, in my opinion, geniuses, because it's so sleek and it's so functional and it does everything so perfectly once you know how to use it. It's a beautiful product. And I use it for a lot of things. I make calls on it. I text. I'm in way too many group texts where I lose track of them. I showed up with something to a party this weekend that wasn't on the list because I didn't read all the group texts because there were too many. I just couldn't keep up with all of them. And so, anyway, that's what this is for. It's what it was designed to do. There's a list of those things. I can use it for other things, though. Did you know that? Like, this is kind of wobbly. I can use it to prop this up. And it works. Feels a lot more sturdy now. You know? Looks like there's a little staple that was left in here from VBS. I could use this to prop it out, kind of pry it out. Probably shouldn't do that much longer, though. I could play catch with Jacob and throw it like a frisbee. I'm not a good thrower. It might hit the back wall. Could probably do that a few times. I can use this for different purposes. It wasn't designed for those things. I can apply it that way. But those are departures from what this was designed to do, that if I do it long enough, it's going to reap some destruction. This is going to crack. It's going to break in some way. Part of it's going to crumble. It might not even function the same way anymore. And when we go through life ignoring what God has to say about his design for anything, and instead we frame design through our own lens of what we feel is best for us, what we're really doing is departing from design that eventually will cause some kind of damage. That's why pornography is so damaging, by the way, and destructive. Because God did not design any of us to enjoy sexual pleasure through that image. A lot of people do it, A lot of people get pleasure from it, but that's not how God designed us to function. It's departing from the design. Because it takes something that was designed to be a deep, meaningful connection between two people that was meant to bring about this deeper spiritual and physical connection, and it turns it into a cheap physical thing that doesn't have any of that meaning that was in the original design. Pornography degrades the people who are making it, because, by the way, the people you see on that screen were made in the image of God the same as you are, and they're being treated as objects, which I think makes God weep. Even science nowadays tells us, outside of Christianity even, very clearly that a certain amount of pornography use actually damages the brains of people watching it. That's a real phenomenon. And hey, if you want to get really personal and practical, as a pastor, I've seen the effects that this can have on a marriage when one spouse is expecting certain things in their sex life that were framed for them by a website instead of the real deal, and no wonder they're not receiving what they're expecting. It's framed by a fake, cheap, acted out sexuality rather than a real, beautiful sexuality within a real relationship as it was designed to be. It's departed from the design. Another thing that sex was never designed to be is it was never meant to be a mark of commitment in your dating relationships. In fact, if somebody you're dating tells you, if you were really committed to me, you would do this, that's actually evidence of a lack of commitment that they have for you. Because sex is designed to be an extension of a covenant commitment. That's what it was designed to be, not a proof of a lesser commitment, not an evidence of commitment. If anyone ever pressures you in this area, that's also not God's design. I hear this one way too often when a young man is told to go out and be adventurous and explore and work out all his options before he settles down. That is not God's design. It leads to hurting yourself and others in ways that you may not even know are possible. Sometimes you don't even know the effects of it until later. And this one maybe matters one of the most. If anyone in this room was ever told that you are only valuable and beautiful and worthy if you do this or do that, that was not God's design. You are beautiful and worthy and valuable simply because God designed you deliberately. So deliberately that he came to die for you out of his love for you. Let's not leave the married people out. For those of you who are married and you're saying, well, once I'm married, isn't everything post-marriage just beautiful and easy? No. Because sex was not designed just to be this prize that you're handed once you get married and hey, everything's good from that time on. It's not some pastor taking one verse out of context, which I hear way too often, teaching it wrong, and now you say to your spouse, well, you need to just give me this because I need it and I'm feeling like it right now, and the Bible says don't deny me. Don't pluck verses out of context and teach them like that, because that's not actually what it says. That's not God's design. There's other marriages who someone uses sex as leverage or a manipulation tactic to get their way. That's not God's design. Sex was never designed to be used as a ransom that you hold against your husband and wife because they need to be a certain way. That's not God's design either. And departure from a design eventually will cause some form of damage or destruction. And if God really designed sex deliberately, then we as Christians, uncomfortable as it may feel for some of us, we have to dive into his design and trust him with his design and try to understand his design. And so again, for those who claim to trust and love God, I have a question for you, and it's, do you think perhaps, if you believe he's the designer of all things, do you think maybe he knows more about this subject than you do? I mean, you could apply that to any area of your life, right? I mean, when we're so prideful about a certain thing, don't you think maybe God knows a little more about that subject than you do? I think so. Okay, let me bring this around. There's a couple things I really feel like I need to say. So the first thing I want to say is, no matter how you're feeling about this right now, you're not alone. Because it can feel lonely in how you feel about this sometimes. And I just I would go so far as to say that most people in this room, whether you want to admit it or not, feel at least a little bit of the destruction I'm describing in this area, okay? From somewhere. I know I did. I wish that I had learned what I know now about God's design and depth for sex when I was younger. I wish I had no scars in my mind from the past. I wish I didn't have certain things in my past. And so the bigger question then becomes, where do we go from here? Okay, we've talked through this definition, but so now what do we do? Where do we go as followers of Jesus? And here's what I want to say next. If you feel broken, hurting, anything like that, shame, you're in the right place. And I mean that. Because the church, as it was designed, all churches don't operate this way, but the church, as it was designed by God, did you know that God designed the church to welcome anybody in to receive hope, healing, and help, no matter what's in their past? Did you know He designed it to be that? And I get that many of them are not that, and I get that some of you have not been treated that way in a church in the past, but that is how He designed it to operate in a healthy church. No matter what you're dragging in, come and see. Let us love you, because we have the greatest hope the world has ever seen, and we want to show you what it looks like. This is a place, this is a family that's built on hope and healing and help if you're willing to ask for it and receive it. And then I just want to say also to some of you that might be feeling certain things right now, you're not alone even if you and I are just talking, okay? And I think a lot of times people put pastors up on this pedestal and they assign so much weight to this title, not realizing that, we're real people that lived real lives too. We struggle. We've been through things. Not all of us knew who God was from birth. And so I want you to remove that title from me for just a second, because I want to say a couple things to you, and I want you to receive it from the right person. I want you to hear a couple things from your brother, Jared, okay? Your brother, Jared, knows the feeling of having some things in his past he wished wasn't there. Your brother, Jared, knows what it feels like to be busted up inside. But your brother also knows and wants you to know, because it changed his life, that there is not a place you can fall. There is not a thing that you can trip over. There is not a valley you can wander to that is too deep, or a room that is too dark, that Jesus Himself will not come and meet you exactly where you're at. Pick you up and carry you to a place you never imagined. And I'm speaking from experience. And I'm sharing this message because I want that for everybody in this room. Because it's big. It's true freedom that you didn't even know existed. Sometimes people come to Jesus and they say, well, to deny that part of me means I'm giving up. I feel like I'm giving up on my freedom, only to find out that when they look back, I never had freedom to begin with, now I do. Remember week 1, I walked you through Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, one of my favorite verses in Proverbs, when he says to trust in God with all your heart, every bit of your being, even when you're not feeling certain things. Lean not on your own understanding, because we all have a leaning to do that, but as we submit our ways to Him and His designs, He will make our path straight. So the band's going to come back up. We're going to close, but I want to close on this important thought. Trust in the designer is what leads to fullness and freedom. You got to trust in the designer. You can't just believe he designed everything. You got to trust in his design, even if you're not feeling it sometimes. No matter what's in your past, trusting God to go forward is what leads to hope, help, and healing. Trust God now from this. No matter what decisions you made in the past, trust God with your next decision. No matter how hard you think that conversation was, trust God with this conversation. Trust God with this confession. Trust God with this prayer that you're praying. Trust God with your next chat with someone who can help you. Trust God when you need support, because you also were not designed to do any of this alone by yourself. That's why the church exists, because you're not supposed to walk this alone, none of it. It's not his design. And trusting God from this point going forward results in your paths becoming straight. No matter how crooked they might have been in the past. No matter how you wandered around in the past. And some of you say, well, come on, man, like, Jared, it's too long. Like, it's been too long. I've never even done anything other than lean on my own understanding in my whole life. I wouldn't even know how to do anything different. There might be people in this room who feel so discouraged that even though the Spirit of God spoke to you about something for the last 30 minutes, you're already thinking to yourself, man, I hear this and I believe it's God's word and it's real wisdom, but I'm still going to face that temptation tonight, or my situation's set up like this, and so how is that going to work? Let me flip your perspective on temptation just for a quick second, because it really helps. Let me remind you what temptation actually is. Don't get down on yourself when you experience temptation. I'm telling you this in love. I meet so many Christians these days who they get so discouraged and down on themselves because they keep experiencing temptation. Temptation's not the sin. If Jesus himself was tempted, we're going to be tempted. I mean, that's not going to go away. Jesus was tempted, but was without sin. In fact, when Jesus was tempted, he was given a way out. And your way out, I would say, is to flip your view on temptation. Temptation is not a sin. It's an invitation to trust God more. Because where temptation wins in our life is typically in areas where we're not trusting God enough. You say, well, I don't trust God to give me this, or I don't trust God to come into my life in this area, so I'm just going to give in. And I promise you this. If you flip that and keep that here and reframe your thinking about temptation, it helps. But it takes practice. And so, today you're like, I kind of want to scroll right now or watch this right now. No, I'm going to trust God instead. Well, I want to hook up with, no, I'm going to trust God. Well, I'm going to trust God. And I promise you, I've seen this play out in so many people's lives as a promise. Every single time that you find yourself trusting God over your own leaning, no matter how hard you lean, when you find yourself trusting God over your own feelings, even though your feelings are real, when you find yourself trusting God over your own appetite and your own desire and your own patterns, I promise you there is immense freedom that can wash over your heart as you come to the other side of that. Because God uses that to change you from the inside out. Sometimes not as fast as you want him to, but he does. But you got to trust God moving forward. So Father, I trust you with the hearts in this room, knowing that you're the one who cares the most. And I thank you in advance for what you're going to do in their lives and in the people around them. And as we trust you with our next steps, and we trust you with next conversations and all those things that have just come up in our hearts and our minds as a result of starting this conversation. And Father, I pray as there are men and women here today, that as they leave this place and go grab lunch or go home or ride in the car together, that if there's a conversation that needs to happen, I pray that it would happen and it would be received with grace. That there would be some in this room who would own in front of somebody their departure from your design and say to even their spouse maybe, I'm so sorry I departed from God's design. I used this as a substitute for intimacy, instead of understanding that this is supposed to be and designed to be the fruit of intimacy. God, I pray that they would trust you with their next step forward, no matter how hard that step might be, that they would lean not on their own understanding, but in all their ways acknowledge you, and that you would make their path straight. Hey, one more time, I know that this is a topic that's sensitive for some people. I know that it's uncomfortable for others and it's not easy to engage, but I want you to know that we as church leadership, we love you so much. No matter who you are, no matter who you've been or what you're struggling with that you've hid from everybody, that's nothing to us. We just love you. And sometimes the thing that's missing in somebody's life in this area or whatever is that they're not part of what I would call healthy community. We talk about this all the time here. I'm just going to say it because it applies here. The church was not designed by God to be a thing that you attend 1 hour a week and get some inspiration. The church was designed by God to be a family, a support system, a group of people that meets needs of each other, a shoulder to cry on, a group of burden carriers who can help carry your burdens for you because maybe you're just weary and you need some broad shoulders to help you. People to pray for you and listen to you and not just say they listen to you and pray for you, but actually hear your heart and meet you there and acknowledge what you're feeling and what you're going through. I know I need my band of brothers every week. I just went a few weeks without as much closeness with them, and I felt it. You know, my grandfather passed away a few days ago. And it was a rough week, but that's just one of many things that I've walked through in this life that I don't know if I would come out the other side the same if I didn't have my church family, my community of people. And I know it takes some initiative and you got to plug in and you got to initiate sometimes just to get into a family, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And I'll just say one more thing, and it's kind of related, it's kind of not, but I just feel led to say it. I held the hands of 2 people as they died this week. And the thing that was really striking is I just want to challenge some of you to not wait until that moment to have conversations that you know you need to have. Don't wait till those moments to tell someone you love them or that you forgive them. Don't wait for those moments to make something right or own something or confess something or take responsibility for your own actions. Because at that point, you just find yourself wishing you could do something that you can no longer ever do. God designed you to need relationships and to do them a certain way, and one of the ways that you're supposed to do them is with some intimacy. And I know that's hard for some of you. But that's part of the foundation that some of us weren't given growing up, and so I'm trying to feed it. Would you guys stand with us?